Good morning everyone and welcome to the last video on IAS 37. In this specific video we are going to be looking at an example that I would have done with you if we had physical lectures in class. Alright, so today we are looking at class example 1. It is in the class example handout that you could find attached to the home document. As always, we practice good exam technique when we go and we do these class questions. So the first thing that we need to go and do is read the required. The required of this question specifically states, based only on the information provided above, discuss in terms of IAS 37, provisions, contingent liabilities, and contingent assets, how the above matter will be classified and treated in the financial statements of Rainbow Construction Limited for the year ended 31 March 2015. Note, only the correct classification treatment should be discussed. The definition of a liability is not required. The financial statements of Rainbow for the year ended 31 March 2015 were authorized for issue on the 30th of June 2015. Now in this required, they specifically state we need to discuss in terms of IAS 37, so we know that here we either have a provision, a contingent asset, or a contingent liability. They want us to discuss how the matter will be classified. So you now need to go and decide, is it a provision, is it a contingent asset, or is it a contingent liability? And then they also want to know how is it treated. So will we recognize something in the financial statements? Will we disclose something in the financial statements? How will we measure it? Do we estimate the amount? Do we have an amount? How do we treat this element, whether it be a provision, a contingent liability, or a contingent asset? Now, very importantly, in the notes section, it's said to only discuss the correct classification treatment. So that means if you decide it is a provision, you're going to state this will be recognized in the financial statements and it will be measured at whatever amount. If you have decided that this is a contingent asset, then you will go and talk about the treatment of a contingent asset. The same applies to a contingent liability. You do not discuss the definition and the treatment of all three of these items. Rainbow Constructions Limited, Rainbow, renders construction services primarily to the government and has been operating for almost 20 years. Government tenders constitute roughly 80% of Rainbow's revenue, while the remainder is generated from services rendered to the private sector. In recent years, the construction industry has been investigated by the Competition Commission over allegations of cover pricing. The investigations conducted by the Competition Commission found that companies with the lowest bids faced no competition due to the fact that all of the other bids were cover bids. As a result of these investigations, many companies in the construction industry have been fined for these cover pricing practices. Cover pricing occurs when competitors collude with one another and decide on which one of them will place the winning proposal. The others will then submit non-competitive bids. The effect of this is that the client or customer receives a false impression of competition in the bidding process. Part A. In February 2014, the government invited construction companies to submit proposals for a tender worth 720 million rand for the construction of the Rwanda Mall. In June 2014, Rainbow was one of the companies that submitted a proposal, and they went through to the final stage of the bidding process. Rainbow had the lowest bid and was ultimately awarded the tender for the construction of the Rwanda Mall, which started on the 1st of January 2015. Rainbow has been involved in and found guilty of cover pricing practices before. This led to allegations that the company had been involved in cover pricing practices with regards to the Rwanda Mall tender. The investigation into these allegations by the Competition Commission commenced on the 25th of February 2015. Rainbow consulted with their legal team on the implications of the matter should they be found guilty of cover pricing. Although these consultations were still in the early stages by the 31st of March 2015, the legal team indicated that the possibility that Rainbow could be found guilty is not remote. So now before you immediately go and start writing down, the definition of a provision, the definition of a contingent liability, and a definition of a contingent asset, and essentially waste your time, it's important that you actually take a second after reading through the information, and now you need to actually come to a decision. Is this the provision? Is it a contingent liability? Or is it a contingent asset? Well, the first one that we can cross off our list is a contingent asset, because a contingent asset is a possible asset that arises from past event, the existence of which will be confirmed by the occurrence or the non-occurrence of an uncertain future event which we cannot control. Now, do you think that if there is a court case against us and we are going to be found guilty, are we going to be owed something? Or are we going to have to make payment and therefore owe something? We're going to have to owe something. We're going to have to make payment. That means it's a liability. It's not a possible asset. An asset means the exact opposite. We don't have an obligation to make payment. Somebody else has an obligation to pay us, and that's not going to be the case if we are found guilty in this court case. So now we have to narrow it down between a provision and a contingent liability. Now, what is a provision? A provision is a liability with uncertain amounts or timing. Okay, so is this a liability right now? Does it meet the definition? No, it doesn't meet the definition as of yet, okay? Because right now, we don't actually know, are we actually going to be liable for this? There is no certainty. It is not an obligation from a past event. It's not a present obligation. So it is not a provision. So that means it has to be a contingent liability, which makes sense because what is a contingent liability? A contingent liability is a possible obligation that will be confirmed by the occurrence or non-occurrence of a specific future event. This is a possible obligation because we do not yet know, are we going to be found guilty or are we going to be found innocent? But when will we know? When the court rules on the case. That is the specific event happening in the future that will confirm whether we actually do have an obligation or not. So as of right now, at the end of the 2015 financial year, this is a contingent liability, and therefore we have to discuss the definition and treatment of a contingent liability. When we answer this question, we first need to state that we believe that this is a contingent liability. So in order to state the position you have taken, that this is a contingent liability and not a provision and not a contingent asset, you need to go and state the definition of a contingent liability. Now, what's very important and what a lot of students forget to do in theory questions is that you need to provide the theory from your IFRS, from your standards, but then you need to apply the points given in the scenario to the theory in the standards in order to actually prove your point. Your marks do not lie in writing down word for word the theory from the standard. Okay, your marks lie in the application. Yes, you do get marks for stating the theory because we have to compensate you for picking the right definition and for taking the time to write it out, but you get half marks there. For application, you get full marks. So most of your marks in a theory question lie in the application, and that is why it is actually so important for you to apply properly, and that is what you need to practice now going into the study period for the exam. You need to practice applying the theory provided. Right, so we stated that this is a contingent liability, and what is a contingent liability? A contingent liability is a possible obligation resulting from a past event whose existence will be confirmed only by the occurrence or non-occurrence of one or more uncertain future events that are not within the control of the entity. That is the definition of a liability. Now, in order to apply that definition, we need to take bits and pieces from the scenario in order to back up the fact that we believe this is a contingent liability. So why is Rainbow in this position? They are in this position because they have been investigated for possible cover pricing allegations by the Competitions Commission. So that investigation leads to the possible obligation at the end of the year. But at the end of the year, there is no indication on the outcome of the investigation. We don't know if we are going to be held liable and are going to have to pay a fine if we are found guilty by the Competitions Commission, or by some miracle, we may actually be found innocent, and then nothing. Then we don't have to pay anything. There's no obligation. But at year end, we do not know what the outcome of the investigation will be, and therefore, it is only a possible obligation. Okay, it is not a current, present obligation. The past event is the involvement in the bidding process for the Rwanda Mall, okay, and the fact that Rainbow was actually awarded the tender for the construction of the mall. That is what led to the investigation, the fact that they had the lowest bid, they were given the tender, and Rainbow has been investigated for cover pricing in the past. Then we need to know, well, what on earth is this uncertain future event that could confirm the existence of this possible obligation? And that would be the outcome of the investigation. We need to know what will be decided by the Competitions Commission, okay? That is the occurrence or non-occurrence of the future event. And if the Competitions Commission says, yes, you are being found guilty of cover pricing, that will then confirm the existence of the possible obligation. And then the outcome of the investigation is not within the control of Rainbow. It is under the control of the Competitions Commission, as they are leading the investigation. So you can see there, we've gone and split our contingent liability definition into 4 little bullet points. And for each little bullet point, we have an application that we have taken from the scenario and we have molded it to fit this definition given to us. Okay? All of the information sitting in that application was given to you. You just need to see, or you just needed to see that, okay, the investigation is the possible obligation. The past event is the fact that they were awarded the tender, and so on. Then you can conclude. The possible outcome and result of the investigation by the Competitions Commission does meet the definition of the contingent liability. We have just proved that by applying the points in the scenario to the definition. And we know that a contingent liability does not get recognized in the financial statements, but we do have to disclose the contingent liability in the notes to the financial statements for the current year end. But then, what do we have to disclose? For 10.5 marks, you can't just tell me this is a contingent liability and therefore it needs to be disclosed. You need to tell me what must be disclosed. So we know that we need to disclose the nature of the event. So what is the nature of the event? We are currently being investigated by the Competitions Commission under allegations of being involved in cover pricing. That's the nature of the event. And what is the estimated financial effect? Well, at year end, we don't know what the estimated financial effect was. We have no clue if we are found guilty, what will we be fined? This fact that you do not know what the financial effect will be must be disclosed. You can't just say there's no financial effect. Of course there's a financial effect if you're going to be found guilty. Okay, and there's a possible obligation. You just don't know what it is yet. You haven't been given any indication. Then you also need to tell us if there are any uncertainties relating to the amount or timing of any cash outflow. So we know that the outcome of the investigation will be what confirms whether we as Rainbow Limited will be liable for any fines due to the cover pricing allegations. We don't know when the outcome of the investigation will come out, therefore the timing is uncertain, and we do not know the amount of any possible cash outflow because they haven't given us an indication of what the possible fine could be if we are found guilty. And then lastly, you always need to state if there is a possibility of any reimbursements. And if you are paying a fine, do you think anybody is going to reimburse you for that? The answer is no. So the possibility of any reimbursements is therefore just not applicable to the circumstances as provided to us in the information.